Sometimes a single act of kindness from a stranger can change not just one life, but an entire family forever. Daniel was a man who had everything people could dream of. He was the kind of man people pointed at when his expensive cars rolled down the street, or when his name appeared in the newspapers for signing another $1 million deal. But inside, he was not like the confident figure everyone believed him to be. Behind his suits, his money, and his powerful name, there was a man who carried something much heavier than gold or business responsibilities. He was a father who did not know how to heal his own son's pain. His son Ethan was only 10 years old. A boy with bright eyes that could light up a room, but his body did not follow the same strength as his mind. Ethan had a condition that made walking almost impossible. He needed a wheelchair to move around, and though Daniel had bought the best one money could buy, it still could not give his son the freedom he wished for. Daniel had built companies, opened doors to places only the rich could reach. Yet when it came to his son's suffering, he felt like the weakest man alive. Daniel's wife had passed away years earlier. Since then, he had been both father and mother to Ethan. He poured his energy into work as if money could fill the empty spaces in their lives. He hired the best therapists, the most experienced nurses, and filled their mansion with gadgets that promised to make Ethan's life easier. But none of it solved the real problem. Ethan was lonely. Daniel often found him staring out of the window, watching kids ride their bikes or chase each other in the street below. Sometimes Ethan smiled, but mostly he sat quietly, clutching his small hands on the armrest of his chair as if he were holding in words he could not say. Daniel's love for his son was strong, but he did not know how to show it. When he was in the office, he felt in control, but when he stood beside Ethan, he felt clumsy, like every word he spoke was wrong. He wanted to encourage him, but often his words came out sharp, almost like orders. You have to stay strong. Ethan, he would say, or we'll find a solution, just wait. He didn't notice that his son didn't need promises or solutions. He just needed someone to sit with him and understand. One Friday evening, Daniel decided to take Ethan out for dinner. It was not something they did often. Usually, food was delivered to their home, cooked by chefs Daniel had on staff. But that day, Daniel wanted something different. He wanted to be with Ethan in a normal place, far from polished tables and silver spoons. He wanted to sit quietly with his son, where no one would whisper about his wealth or his status. He remembered a small diner he had passed by on his way back from work. It looked simple, nothing fancy, but it was always full of people laughing and eating as if they were at home. Daniel thought maybe that was the kind of place Ethan needed. When they arrived, the night was cool, and the lights from the diner glowed warmly through the glass windows. Ethan's face lit up. He liked the smell of fried chicken and pies that escaped through the door every time someone went in or out. But when Daniel tried to push Ethan's wheelchair up the small ramp leading inside, the chair got stuck. The ramp was old and a little broken. The front wheel caught in a crack, and no matter how Daniel pushed, it would not move forward. Ethan's excitement faded quickly into frustration. He tugged at the armrest, his small face turning red. "It's not working," he muttered, his voice heavy with embarrassment. People passing by began to glance at them. Daniel's jaw tightened. He was not used to being helpless in front of others. Normally, he would call someone, pay someone, order a repair. But here, in front of his son, in front of strangers, he could do nothing. Before Daniel could say a word, a young woman appeared at the doorway. She wore a simple apron, her hair tied back loosely, and there was a kindness in her eyes that Daniel had not seen in a long time. She was a waitress at the diner, moving quickly between tables just moments before, but when she saw Ethan's struggle, she didn't hesitate. She came straight to them. "Need a hand?" she asked gently. Daniel was about to respond, but before he could, she crouched down to Ethan's level. Her voice softened, not toward Daniel but toward the boy. "Hey, buddy, how about I help you get inside? That way you won't miss out on the fries." Ethan looked at her, surprised. Most adults talked to him like he was fragile, as if every word should be whispered. But this waitress, Sophie, as Daniel would later learn, spoke to him like he was just a kid. No pity, no sadness, only kindness and humor. Ethan blinked at her, then gave a shy nod. With surprising strength, Sophie bent down, slid one arm under Ethan's back and the other under his legs, and carefully lifted him. She carried him through the doorway, her steps steady, her smile never fading. Ethan wrapped his small arms around her neck, his nervousness melting into comfort. Daniel followed behind, stunned. He could have called his driver, asked for another person to help, even demanded the diner fix their ramp immediately. But none of that mattered. In that moment, what Sophie did with ease and warmth felt more powerful than anything Daniel's money had ever achieved. When Sophie set Ethan down, gently in a chair by the table, she crouched again so she could look at him directly. "There you go, champ, now. What's it gonna be? Pancakes for dinner, or are you more of a burger guy?" Ethan giggled, the sound so rare that Daniel's chest tightened. "Tea?" He hadn't heard his son laugh so freely in weeks. Said quickly, his eyes shining. "Good choice," Sophie replied with a grin. "Extra fries, right?" "I can tell you're a fries person." Daniel sat across from his son, silent, watching. He had never seen Ethan look so alive with a stranger. Sophie didn't treat him like a problem to solve or a burden to carry. She treated him like a boy who wanted fries and laughter. Something inside Daniel shifted, though he couldn't name it yet. For the rest of the evening, Sophie moved between her tables, but every time she passed by, she stopped for a moment to check on Ethan. She made him laugh with small jokes, asked him about his favorite superheroes, and even taught him how to balance a spoon on his nose. Ethan tried and failed, bursting into laughter each time, while Daniel watched, his heart heavier and lighter at the same time. He had brought Ethan here for a simple meal. But what he witnessed instead was something he could never have bought. A stranger had carried his son inside, yes, but more importantly, she had carried away his sadness, only for a little while. That night, as they drove back to their mansion, Ethan leaned his head against the car window, smiling quietly to himself. "She was nice, Dad," he whispered. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. For the first time in a long time, he realized that all the money in the world couldn't have given Ethan what Sophie had given him in a single evening and moment of pure, unfiltered joy. And though Daniel didn't say it out loud, he knew he would return to that diner. Something had started there, something he didn't yet understand, but he knew it was important. Daniel had not been able to forget that evening in the diner. For days, the picture of Sophie lifting Ethan stayed in his mind. He was a man who lived in a world where people did things for money, power, or advantage. Oh, what Sophie did that. Night had no reason behind it, except kindness. Daniel found himself thinking about it when he sat in his office, when he looked at his son during breakfast, even when he closed his eyes at night. It was as if the simple act of a waitress had shaken something deep inside him. The next weekend, Daniel decided to take Ethan back to the diner. He told himself it was because Ethan had enjoyed the food, but deep down, he knew it was because he wanted to see Sophie again. Ethan's face brightened the moment the car pulled up near the little diner. He pointed excitedly at the glowing sin, as if it were a place of magic. When they reached the door, the same problem happened again. The ramp outside was still broken. Daniel felt his chest tighten as he tried pushing the wheelchair up, and once again, it got stuck. Ethan's small hands tightened on the armrests, his lips pressing together in frustration. Daniel's heart ached. He hated seeing his son feel trapped like this. He was about to call the manager out, maybe even offer to pay for a new ramp immediately, when a familiar voice called out, "Stuck again, huh?" Sophie appeared from inside, wiping her hands on her apron. Without hesitation, she walked over and crouched beside Ethan. "Hey, champ, ready for round 2? She asked with a playful grin. Ethan looked at her and nodded quickly, a smile breaking across his face. Sophie didn't ask Daniel for permission, didn't wait for instructions. She simply leaned down and carefully lifted Ethan out of his chair again. Daniel stood frozen, watching as Ethan clung to her with ease. No fear, no hesitation. His son rarely allowed strangers to touch him, but with Sophie it was different. Inside. Sophie set Ethan down at the same table they had used before. She ruffled his hair lightly and whispered, "Next time, we're going to teach that ramp a lesson." Ethan giggled, and the sound spread warmth through the entire room. Daniel sat down across from them, silently observing. He was not used to being quiet. In business meetings, he was always the voice that controlled the room. But here, he didn't know what to say. Sophie had already managed to do what he struggled with, daily make Ethan smile as Sophie took their orders. Daniel found himself studying her. She moved quickly between tables, balancing plates and glasses. Yet every time she came near Ethan, her face softened, her voice gentler. She didn't talk to him like someone fragile. Instead, she asked him questions that made him feel normal. "So, burger again. Are we going wild and trying pancakes this time?" she teased. Ethan laughed and said, "Burger. Always burger." When Sophie walked away, Daniel leaned toward his son. "You like her, don't you?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded without hesitation. "She's funny, Dad." "And she doesn't. Treat me like a baby." Daniel's chest tightened. His son's words cut deep. Is that what he had been doing all along? Treating Ethan like someone broken instead of like a normal boy? He had thought he was protecting him. But maybe he had been making him feel small. The food arrived. Sophie stayed for a moment, showing Ethan how to balance his burger so it wouldn't fall apart in his hands. "The secret is holding it. Like treasure," she explained, pretending to guard her own invisible burger. Ethan copied her, holding his meal tightly with a look of concentration. Then burst out laughing when Sophie exaggerated a bite from thin air. Daniel smiled, watching them, though a strange ache settled in his chest. Halfway through the meal, Ethan's wheelchair, which had been parked beside the table, tipped slightly when someone brushed past. Ethan panicked for a moment, thinking it might roll away. Sophie noticed immediately. Without hesitation, she stood, steadied the chair, and then crouched again beside Ethan. "You know what? That chair doesn't get to boss you around," she said softly. "You're the boss here." She tapped his nose lightly, making him laugh again. Daniel sat silently, his fork paused in midair. He realized how natural Sophie's care was. Didn't make a scene, didn't look at Ethan with pity. She simply gave him strength with her words. Daniel could almost see his son sit a little taller, small shoulders straightening with pride. After they finished their food, Ethan looked happier than Daniel had seen in months. He leaned toward Sophie when she came to collect the plates and whispered something that made her laugh. Daniel's curiosity burned, but he stayed quiet. He didn't want to break the bond that was forming in front of him when it was time to leave. Sophie carried Ethan outside again. The night air was cool and Ethan's face glowed with joy. Sophie placed him carefully in his chair and smiled at him. "See you next time, champ. Don't forget you're the boss, not the chair." Nodded, his smile wide and bright. "I won't forget," he said firmly. Daniel stood there watching the exchange, his heart full of emotions he couldn't name. Gratitude, admiration, maybe even guilt. Realized he had been trying to solve Ethan's problems with money, but Sophie had given his son something priceless: confidence and laughter. Now she had done it without asking for anything in return. On the way home, Ethan couldn't stop talking about her. "Did you see how she carried me, Dad? Like it was nothing." And she joked about the ramp. "She's not scared of me being in a chair. She's nice." Daniel listened quietly, his hands tight on the steering wheel. For years he had been fighting battles with doctors, therapists, and expensive solutions. But tonight, a waitress in a small diner had shown him something completely different. I've shown him that sometimes what Ethan needed wasn't more treatment, but simply someone who saw him as a kid, not a problem. That night, when Daniel tucked Ethan into bed, Ethan whispered, "Can we go back again soon?" Daniel nodded. "Of course, son, as many times as you want." But even as he left Ethan's room, Daniel knew it wasn't just his son who wanted to go back. Something inside him needed to see Sophie again, too. Not just because of what she had done for Ethan, but because she had reminded him of something he had forgotten long ago, what true kindness looked like. And deep in his heart, Daniel knew this was only the beginning. Daniel kept going back to the diner with Ethan. At first he told himself it was just because Ethan enjoyed the food there. But in his heart he knew it was more than that. Every time they stepped inside and saw Sophie, something changed in Ethan. The boy who usually stayed quiet and shy became full of laughter and light. He asked questions, told jokes, and even forgot about his wheelchair for a little while. Daniel could not ignore it. He had spent years searching for specialists, buying the best equipment, arranging therapies that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. But not one of those things had brought this kind of joy to his son. Diner became a small part of their weekly routine. Daniel noticed how Sophie always remembered Ethan's favorite food. If he ordered a burger, she already knew how he liked it with extra fries, no onions. If he wanted pancakes, she remembered. He liked them with more syrup than most kids could handle. She never treated him like he was difficult. She treated him as if serving him was the most natural thing in the world. One evening, as Daniel sat across from Ethan, he found himself watching Sophie closely. She moved quickly between tables, carrying heavy trays, pouring coffee for tired customers, and still managing to smile at everyone. She looked tired, though. Her eyes had a shadow beneath them, and her shoulders seemed weighed down by more than just plates. But whenever she turned to Ethan, the weariness vanished. She bent down, spoke gently, and made him feel like the most important person in the room. Daniel wanted to know more about her. He wasn't used to being curious about people like this. In his world, people were either useful to his business or they weren't. But Sophie felt different. She had no reason to care about his son, yet she did, and not for money or recognition. She did it because that was who she was. One night as Sophie refilled Ethan's drink, Daniel asked casually, "Do you always work this late?" Sophie gave a small smile. "Most nights, sometimes mornings too." "That sounds exhausting," Daniel said. She shrugged it. "Pays the bills. Someone has to do it." Then she quickly changed the subject to Ethan, asking him about his favorite superhero. But Daniel kept thinking about her words. He realized there was much more to her story. Later that week, Daniel overheard two other waitresses talking about Sophie when she stepped into the kitchen. They mentioned that she had taken care of her sick mother for years, that her father had passed away when she was young, and that she had once been in college but dropped out to help her family. Daniel listened quietly, pretending not to care. But every word sank into him. He couldn't stop thinking about how hard her life must have been, and yet she carried herself with kindness. She didn't complain or show bitterness. She smiled even when she was tired. Ethan noticed it too. "Dad," he whispered one evening while Sophie walked away, "she's strong like a superhero." Daniel looked at his son and nodded. "Yes, she is." Over time, Ethan grew more attached to Sophie. He began asking Daniel, "When can we go to the diner again?" Sometimes he even refused the food cooked by their private chef, insisting he wanted pancakes made by Sophie. Daniel found it almost amusing, but at the same time, he understood. Sophie gave Ethan something he craved: normalcy. She didn't make him feel different. She didn't focus on what he couldn't do. Instead, she encouraged him to try things on his own. One evening, Ethan spilled a glass of juice while trying to drink without help. Daniel immediately reached out, ready to clean it and comfort him, but Sophie was quicker. She knelt down and said, "Hey, no big deal. Everyone spills. Look, I do it all the time." She exaggerated a clumsy movement, pretending to spill an invisible glass, and Ethan laughed through his embarrassment.
Ow.
Then she handed him a napkin and encouraged him to wipe the table himself. Daniel watched, stunned. He realized that he had been so focused on protecting Ethan from feeling embarrassed that he had accidentally made him feel weaker. Sophie, on the other hand, gave him confidence by letting him make mistakes. Another time, Ethan was struggling to move his chair a few inches. Daniel instinctively wanted to help, but Sophie crouched beside Ethan and whispered, "Push with your arms. Don't give up yet." Ethan pushed again, his face red with effort, until finally the chair moved. His smile afterward was wide and proud. Sophie clapped softly, whispering, "See? Told you. You're stronger than you think." Daniel felt something inside him shift. He had always tried to fix everything for Ethan, but Sophie was showing him that sometimes the best way to love someone was to step back and let them try. Over time, Daniel found himself lingering at the diner longer than he needed to. He listened. When Sophie told small stories about her life, about how her mother used to sing while cooking, how she once dreamed of being a teacher, and how she still hoped to go back to school someday, Daniel didn't interrupt or offer solutions, though he wanted to. He just listened, which was unusual for him. He realized he admired her resilience. Ethan adored her. He began to share his secrets with Sophie, things he didn't even tell Daniel. One evening, when Sophie asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, Ethan whispered, "I want to fly planes, but I know I can't." Sophie leaned in and smiled. "Maybe you won't fly them, but maybe you'll design them. Or maybe you'll invent something even better. Don't close the door before you even try, champ." Ethan's eyes sparkled, and Daniel's heart ached again. He had never thought of telling his son things like that. He had been so busy protecting him from disappointment that he had forgotten to give him hope. As the weeks passed, Daniel began to see Sophie not just as a waitress, but as someone extraordinary. She had patience he had never seen before. She gave his son courage, laughter, and dreams. Daniel knew that money had always been his answer to everything. But watching Sophie, he realized money could not create what she gave freely: love, kindness, and respect. One late evening, as Daniel and Ethan prepared to leave, Daniel found himself watching Sophie quietly as she wiped down tables. She looked tired, her apron stained, her hair a little messy from rushing around. Yet when Ethan waved goodbye, she smiled as brightly as if she weren't carrying the weight of her world. Daniel knew she was changing Ethan's life, but what he didn't realize yet was that she was changing his, too. On the way home that night, Ethan leaned back in his seat and whispered, "Dad, she makes me feel like I can do anything." Daniel didn't reply right away. His throat was tight. Finally, he said softly, "She makes me feel that way too, son." For a man who had spent his whole life believing power came from wealth, it was a strange and humbling truth. For a waitress in a small diner was teaching him the meaning of strength, not with riches or authority, but with kindness. And as he drove through the quiet streets, Daniel realized he wanted to keep watching, keep learning, and keep seeing Sophie bring light into his son's world. One cool evening, Daniel and Ethan went back to the diner again. By now, it had become their special place. Ethan always looked forward to it, and Daniel had stopped pretending it was just about the food. He knew the truth. It was about Sophie. She had a way of making Ethan laugh, of making him forget about his struggles. And Daniel couldn't help but be drawn to that warmth. That night, Ethan's wheelchair was giving trouble. The wheels had been squeaking for a while. Then, as Daniel pushed him toward the diner, the chair jerked suddenly and stopped moving. Ethan frowned and tugged at the wheels, trying to move forward, but it wouldn't budge. Daniel bent down, trying to fix it, but the chair seemed stuck. He was about to get angry, ready to call the company that had built the expensive chair, when Sophie appeared. She was carrying a tray out to another customer, but when she saw Ethan's face, she didn't hesitate.
Ow.
She placed the tray down quickly and rushed over. "Chair acting up again, champ?" she asked with a soft laugh, crouching beside him. Ethan nodded, embarrassed. Daniel was about to step in and say he would handle it, but before he could, Sophie gently touched Ethan's arm.
Ow.
"No worries," she said cheerfully. "Want me to give you a lift?" Ethan smiled shyly and nodded. Sophie bent down, lifted him with ease, and carried him inside. Daniel followed, but this time he was not just watching her actions. He was watching the way she spoke to his son. She didn't just carry Ethan's body. She carried his spirit, too. She spoke to him like he was strong, capable, and important. After setting Ethan down at the table, Sophie knelt so she was eye level with him. "You know," she said seriously, "that chair doesn't get to decide where you go. You do. You're the boss." Ethan giggled and puffed his chest proudly. "I'm the boss," he repeated. Daniel felt something stir inside him. He had spent years buying everything his son needed, but never once had he thought to tell him he was the boss of his own life. He realized that Sophie was giving Ethan something no therapist or doctor had ever given him: confidence. Later that evening, as Sophie served them their food, Daniel spoke quietly. "You treat him differently than most people do," he said. Sophie raised her eyebrows. "Differently?" Daniel nodded. "You don't act like he's fragile." Sophie smiled warmly. "Because he's not. He's a kid. Kids are stronger than people think. They don't want pity. They want fun, laughter, and someone who sees them as more than their struggles. Her words struck Daniel deeply. He realized he had been guilty of the very thing she was describing. He had tried to shield Ethan so much that he had unknowingly made him feel fragile. The night carried on with more laughter. But something stayed heavy in Daniel's chest. When they finally left the diner, he walked Sophie to the door, while Ethan played with a small toy car in his lap. Daniel's voice was low when he said, "I don't think you realize how much you're helping him. You've given him more joy than I've managed in years." Sophie shook her head quickly. I'm not doing anything special. I'm just treating him the way he deserves." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, his eyes thoughtful. "You're wrong. It is special." Weeks passed, and Daniel learned more about Sophie. He noticed the small cracks behind her smile. Sometimes her hands trembled from exhaustion when she poured coffee. Sometimes her shoes were worn down from long hours of standing. One evening, while Ethan was busy chatting with her, another waitress mentioned to a customer that Sophie had lost her apartment because the rent had gone up. She had been staying with a friend until she could find something else. Daniel's chest tightened. A woman like Sophie, who gave so much to others, was struggling silently. Didn't feel fair. On their way home, Ethan chattered about how Sophie had made him laugh again, but Daniel was deep in thought. For the first time in his life, he wanted to help someone not because it would benefit him, but because it was right. The next day, Daniel quietly asked one of his assistants to look into Sophie's situation. He didn't want to embarrass her, but he wanted to know how he could help. The report came back quickly. Her rent had gone up. She couldn't afford it. She was working double shifts to save for a small place of her own. That night, when Daniel and Ethan visited the diner, Daniel found himself watching Sophie even more carefully. She was smiling, laughing, carrying plates as usual, but now he could see the tiredness behind her eyes. Ethan was too busy enjoying himself to notice. But Daniel couldn't ignore it. After dinner, when Sophie came by their table, Daniel said, "Softly, you work so hard. Shouldn't have to carry everything alone." Sophie laughed lightly, brushing off his words. "That's life. We all carry what we have to." Daniel leaned forward. "But what if someone wanted to help you?" Sophie's smile faded for a moment. She looked at him seriously, her voice calm but firm. "I don't want charity, Mr. Bennett. I've worked hard all my life. If I accept help, it has to be because I've earned it, not because someone feels sorry for me." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding her pride. He realized that giving her money openly would only insult her. She was not someone who wanted pity. She wanted dignity. He respected that. That night when they left, Daniel felt torn. Wanted to make her life easier, but he also didn't want to hurt her pride. He knew he had to find another way something that would show her he valued her, not pitied her. As they drove home, Ethan asked, "Dad, why do you look so serious?" Daniel glanced at his son in the rearview mirror. "I was just thinking about Sophie." Ethan grinned. "She's the best, isn't she?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Yes, she is." He knew then that Sophie wasn't just helping Ethan. She was changing him too. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about money or deals or business. He was thinking about people, about kindness, dignity, and love. That night, lying in his bed, Daniel decided he wouldn't give up. He would find a way to help Sophie without hurting her pride. She had given his son a gift that money couldn't buy. It was his turn to give her something back. And though he didn't yet know how, he was determined to make it happen. Daniel had spent days thinking about Sophie. He wanted to help her, but he wanted to do it in a way that showed respect, not pity. For years, he had believed that money could solve everything. But he now understood that some things needed thought, care, and understanding. Sophie had given his son joy, confidence, and laughter, and he wanted to repay her, but he needed to make sure she felt valued. It's not like she was receiving charity. One afternoon, Daniel quietly arranged a small surprise. He contacted a school that Sophie had once dreamed of attending but had dropped out of due to her responsibilities at home. He'd worked behind the scenes, paying her tuition in secret so that she could return to college without any embarrassment. He made sure everything was ready, from her admission to the textbooks she would need. But he did not want to reveal it all at once. He knew Sophie's pride would make her resist if he simply handed her money. A few days later, Daniel invited Sophie to come with Ethan to a special event at the diner. He told her nothing except that he had something important to show them. Sophie agreed, curious but cautious. Ethan was excited, bouncing slightly in his wheelchair as they arrived. Sophie smiled, chatting with him as if everything was normal. She didn't suspect anything unusual. When they were seated, Daniel asked her to look at a small envelope he had placed on the table. "Open it," he said quietly. Sophie hesitated, then carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from the college welcoming her back to finish her studies, along with all the necessary information for her tuition and schedule. Her eyes widened. I don't understand," she whispered. Daniel leaned forward. Don't have to pay for anything. This is your chance to go back to school, to finish what you started. You deserve it." Sophie blinked, her pride battling with her surprise. I can't accept this," she said softly. "I didn't earn it. You've already earned it," Daniel replied gently. "Not with money, but with your kindness, patience, and courage. You've changed my son's life. You've changed mine. This is just a way to honor that." Sophie looked at Ethan, who was smiling brightly, oblivious to the seriousness of the moment. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Daniel smiled softly. "Then just say yes. That's enough." For a moment she was silent, then slowly nodded. "Yes," she said, barely audible. The weeks that followed were busy but joyful. Sophie returned to college, attending classes in the morning and still working at the diner, part-time to maintain her connection with Ethan. Daniel ensured she had a flexible schedule and everything she needed to succeed. But that wasn't the only change he had planned. He knew that Ethan had grown attached to Sophie in a way that was rare. She wasn't just a helper or a friend. She was a part of their lives now. Daniel decided to offer her a new position that suited her strengths. He invited her to work with Ethan, not as a nurse or a babysitter, but as a caregiver, companion, and mentor. The salary and benefits he offered were generous, reflecting the respect he had for her abilities. When Daniel spoke to Sophie about this, she hesitated. "I don't want to feel like I'm being bought," she said. "You're not being bought," Daniel replied firmly. "You're being valued. This isn't charity. This is respect for everything you've done and will continue to do for my son." Sophie looked at Ethan, who grinned at her. I think I can do that," she said softly, still unsure if it was real. Daniel nodded, smiling. "It's real, and it's just the beginning." From that day on, Sophie became a permanent part of Ethan's life. She helped him with daily activities, encouraged him to try new things, and most importantly, gave him the confidence to believe in himself. She read to him, played games, and celebrated every small victory as if it were a grand achievement. Ethan thrived under her care, learning that he could accomplish more than he had ever imagined. Daniel watched this transformation quietly. He realized that his wealth and power could not teach his son the lessons Sophie had given freely: patience, courage, joy, and love. He began to spend more time with Ethan himself, learning from Sophie how to connect with his son on a deeper level. He listened more, laughed more, and slowly the bond between father and son grew stronger than ever. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Daniel spoke softly to Sophie. "You've done more than anyone could have expected. You've changed Ethan's life, and you've changed mine too." Sophie smiled, her eyes glistening. "I'm just doing what I can," she said humbly. "No," Daniel said firmly. "You've done more than you know. You've shown me that love and kindness are more powerful than anything money can buy." Sophie looked at him, a mixture of pride and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel smiled and looked at Ethan, who was playing quietly with a toy. "And thank you," he said softly, "for being part of his life and for being part of mine." Life continued, but things had changed forever. Sophie had returned to school, pursuing her dreams while still being present for Ethan. She had a secure and respected position in their lives, and she finally had the opportunity to build the future she had dreamed of. Ethan was happier than ever confident, joyful, and thriving. And Daniel, once a man who believed money could solve every problem, had learned a lesson no fortune could teach. The most valuable gifts in life are love, kindness, and the people who give them freely. 1 quiet night, as Daniel watched Sophie tuck Ethan into bed, he realized that it wasn't his money that had changed her life. It was her own heart that had changed everything: his son's life, his own life, and eventually the lives of everyone around her. And for the first time, Daniel felt truly grateful for someone other than himself, someone who had shown him what it really meant to care. Sophie, sitting quietly in the living room, smiled as she listened to Ethan's laughter. She had no idea how much she had impacted the life of a billionaire father and his son. To her, she had simply been kind. But Daniel knew better. He knew that a simple act of courage and warmth could change lives forever. That night, as Daniel finally went to bed, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had given Sophie the tools to build her future. But he also realized something more important. She had given him and his son a gift that no money could ever buy. And in that gift he found something he had been searching for all his life: hope, love, and the true meaning of family.